Welcome back, chess friends. So Bourdonnais and McDonnell have both been starting to feel the pressures of celebrity life. McDonnell has come to the game today wearing his shades, and his agent is telling everybody not to draw any pictures, but he'll sign some autographs later. Bourdonnais, however, is completely fine with having his picture drawn, and here it is. But between you and me, I don't think it's a very good likeness. Anyway, on with the game. So it's match 2, game number 4. McDonnell is winning 2 games to 1, and Bourdonnais has the white pieces. He opens with e4. We have e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop to c4, bishop to c5, and c3. And now McDonnell plays d6, and Morphy in 1859 says, "We have, in a note to one of the preceding contests, taken occasion to remind the student that knight to f6 is here the correct reply. d6 enables the first player to obtain the better game through the establishment of his pawns in the centre." Okay, so d6 was played, and now we have d3, and again Morphy says, "d4 was the coup just, and properly followed up would have given him a slightly superior position." But he played d3, so we continue. Knight to f6, now b4, chasing the bishop, and the bishop goes back to b6, and Bourdonnais goes a4, continuing to try to gain space on the queen side. And McDonnell plays a6, and then we have b5 from Bourdonnais, which of course is now attacking this knight. So the knight goes back to e7, and Bourdonnais plays h3. So he's playing a lot of pawn moves here, not really looking to his development. We'll see how this works out for him. We have knight to g6 from McDonnell, getting his knight to a better square, and now queen to e2. Although here the engine would have much preferred him to take the pawn here, but okay, he played queen to e2, and now we have bishop to e6. So this game, McDonnell is doing very well at developing ahead of Bourdonnais, which we don't often see. And now we have knight to a3 and castles by McDonnell. And here Bourdonnais plays g4, pushing another pawn, and Morphy wakes up and he says, "The style of play adopted by Bourdonnais in the game before us cannot be commended. It is by far too bold and reckless to be ventured upon with an adversary of equal force, and generally results in defeat." So this sounds good for McDonnell, not so much for Bourdonnais. d5, attacking the bishop, so the bishop goes back to a2, and now McDonnell just captures the pawn. But this reveals an attack on the white bishop here, but it is defended by the rook, so maybe this is fine. Bourdonnais captures the pawn back, and McDonnell just goes for the bishop, and the rook captures it back. Now here, McDonnell spots that c5 would be a nice outpost for one of his knights, so he starts bringing one over via d7. Bourdonnais plays knight to c4, and then McDonnell plays rook to e8, getting on a nice central file. Bourdonnais continues to push his wing pawns with h4. Maybe he's trying to trap this knight, but McDonnell doesn't mind about this. He brings his knight to the outpost, as we said, and this is threatening the wing pawn here. Bourdonnais, however, decides that d5 is a nice outpost for his rook for some reason. He brings it across to d2, attacking the queen. The queen moves, and he brings the rook up to d5. It looks a bit strange to me, centralizing a rook. Normally they're better on the edges of the board. But okay, McDonnell captures the pawn on the wing, and if you look carefully here, you'll see that he's threatening to pick up this pawn and fork the rook and the queen, whilst his other horse is also threatening to fork the rook and the queen. So what does Bourdonnais do here? Well, he decides to push h5 and threaten the knight in front of the king, so it comes to f4. And Morphy says, "Well played. Black must now win the exchange. To have taken the c-pawn with the other knight would have been bad play. Suppose the knight captures c3 and does the fork. Queen to d3. Knight captures the rook. The h-pawn captures the knight. And then we have knight to f6, the best move. Now g captures f7 with check. The king captures back. And now queen to b3, and white must win. But not so fast, Morphy. The engine says that king to e7 is drawing. So what are you talking about? Let's go back. So we have the knight on f4 forking. Now the bishop captures the knight, and the other knight captures the pawn, performing the fork. And the queen comes to d3. The knight captures the rook. The queen captures the knight. And now the pawn captures the bishop. And when all is said and done, you can see that indeed McDonnell is up the exchange. He has 2 rooks, whereas Bourdonnais has 2 knights. So let's see how this continues. knight to g5, and you can see that he's got two pieces attacking this pawn, so McDonnell defends it with rook to e7. Labourdonnais keeps trying to attack the king. He pushes his wing pawn, but McDonnell just pushes his g pawn, and he's completely fine. So Labourdonnais captures the bishop here, the pawn captures the knight back, and Labourdonnais backs off his queen to d4. But look out, McDonnell, he's threatening checkmate here with queen to g7. So McDonnell defends it with queen to f8, and he is still completely fine. We have queen to f6, and it looks like Labourdonnais is trying to crowd around the black king to try to force something this way, but McDonnell doesn't really mind. His king's very well defended, so he just brings his rook over to d7 on the open file heading towards the white king. Labourdonnais plays king to e2, but this gives McDonnell time to bring his other rook over to join in the fun on the open central file here. Labourdonnais pushes e5, and looks like he's continuing to try to crowd that black king, but of course this gives McDonnell the opportunity to check him on d2 with the rook. So the king retreats to f1, and here I'm just going to give you a couple of seconds to see if you can spot McDonnell's next move. You can even pause the video if you like. Well, of course, the move was rook captures on f2 with check, and this causes Morphy to comment. He says, "Very well played. This sacrifice forces the game." So Labourdonnais captures back, and here McDonnell plays queen to c5 with check. And with this move, he's leaving the defense of this g7 square. Labourdonnais is just one move away from delivering a checkmate here, so McDonnell, just be careful, please. The king has to move, so king to g2, but this means the rook can come down and deliver another check, so the king keeps running to h3, and the queen comes into e3 to get another check. But the king cannot run away to h4 here because it will be instant checkmate, defended by this pawn, and this square is covered by this pawn in front of the king. So that's not an option. It's not an option for Labourdonnais. So what can he do? Well, the only thing that he can do is sacrifice both his knight and his rook in order to let the king escape. So he blocks first with the knight, and this vacates this g5 square so the king can come over to hide in it. So when the queen captures here and delivers the check, you'll notice that it also forks the rook, and the king can't come down to defend because the other rook's blocking it. So the king goes to h4 and he loses the rook as well. But here he tucks himself in behind the pawn on g5. And remember here that Labourdonnais is just one move away from delivering checkmate, so McDonnell is going to have to deal with this. And he does so by moving his king to f8, so should the queen come to either of these squares, he has an escape route. What's that, Morphy? You've got another line you want to show us. I hope it's going to be better than your last one. Okay, so Morphy says, "The following line of play indicated by another commentator would have been far more expeditious. Queen sacrifice on h6. Okay, I'll give Morphy this one. This looks good. King captures the queen, and now the rook delivers a check. The king has to move back. Pawn to h6, delivering another check. The king can't capture it. It's defended by the rook, so he has to go forward, capture the pawn on f4. The rook comes across, skewering the queen here. So after the king moves, the rook picks up the queen, and after the pawn captures back, you can see McDonnell has 6 pawns to Labourdonnais' 3, and it's just completely winning for McDonnell. So very nice, Morphy. Thank you for that. That wasn't played though. Instead, McDonnell wanted to toy with Labourdonnais a little bit longer. So he moved his king to f8, and it continues with queen to h8 with check, so the king moves, the queen comes back to f6 with another check. And as you probably guessed, Labourdonnais is just going to try to keep checking that black king and try to force a draw that way. We'll see if it's a working strategy or not. The king moves to e8, so the queen checks on h8 again. The king goes to d7 this time, so Labourdonnais checks with his pawn. McDonnell captures the pawn, and then this allows the queen to check again on g7. King comes forward to d6, but this allows the queen to do a diagonal check on f8, and this time McDonnell backs off to c7. However, this allows Labourdonnais to pick up this pawn, delivering a check and forking the rook. But it's okay, McDonnell can block with the rook, and we continue with the checks. This time McDonnell puts his king on the back rank, and now the queen goes to g7 and blocks with the rook. Now here, Bourdonnais decides to stop with the checks and capture the pawn on the wing here. However, the engine says it's now force mate in 9. But McDonnell wants it to be mate in 10 because that's much cooler. It's a round number. So he plays queen to d5 and goes through a little repeating sequence. The king goes to h4, the queen goes back to the corner, the king goes back to g5, and now McDonnell plays rook to d5 and the king goes to f6. It's almost as if McDonnell is toying with Bourdonnais by this point. And in fact, you would be right, because this entire game, McDonnell has actually been in stealth beast mode, and he reveals his true colours now. We have queen to f3 with check, so the king picks up the pawn here. Queen to e4 with check, and here the best move for Bourdonnais would be king to f7, because it extends the game a little bit more. But instead, he didn't see that, and he played king to f6, and now it's mate in 5. We have queen to e5 with check, king to f7, rook to d7 with check, skewering the queen, and the next move that Bourdonnais should play but doesn't play is king captures pawn. He plays king to f8 instead, and now it's mate in 2. We have queen to f6 with check, and here Bourdonnais decided to resign the game, and McDonnell goes 3 games to 1 up in match 2. He only needs 2 more games to win this whole second match. So awesome stuff. Of course, why did Bourdonnais resign? Well, there's nothing that he can do here. If he blocks with the queen, it's just checkmate. If he moves the king over, the queen can come here and deliver a checkmate, and it's just finished. So awesome stuff. Thank you for joining me for this excellent game, and I'll see you again next time for game number 5.